Imagine standing somewhere in northern France in 1944, long after the beaches of Normandy have fallen silent, and watching what appears to be an American armored division preparing for a major offensive. Tanks line the hedgerows in careful formation. Trucks move in steady columns along narrow country roads. Radio operators transmit constant streams of coded chatter, and officers lean over maps illuminated by dim lantern light as if the next large assault is only hours away. From the air, it looks convincing. From a distance, it sounds authentic. Through binoculars, it appears organized, disciplined, and very real. And yet none of it truly exists. The tanks are inflatable rubber. The artillery pieces are hollow props. The radio traffic is scripted and performed. The entire division, which seems large enough to shift the balance of a regional battle, is composed of artists, architects, sound engineers, illustrators, and designers who were asked to fight a war not with firepower, but with imagination. During World War II, at a moment when Allied forces needed every possible advantage as they pushed deeper into occupied Europe, the United States deployed one of the most unusual military units in its history. It did not specialize in direct assault, nor did it lead charges across open ground. Instead, it created illusions so detailed and so persuasive that experienced German commanders repositioned real troops, real artillery, and real resources in response to threats that were carefully staged performances. Officially, it was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. History would later remember it as the Ghost Army. For decades, almost no one outside a small circle of insiders even knew it had existed. By the summer of 1944, the Allied invasion of Western Europe had succeeded in establishing a foothold in France, and the war had entered a phase defined not just by combat, but by movement. Armies advanced across countryside, repositioned along rivers, and prepared for complex crossings and coordinated assaults that required precise timing and overwhelming force. However, every movement created exposure. If the enemy correctly identified where the next major push would occur, they could reinforce that sector, concentrate artillery, and slow or even halt the advance. The element of surprise, therefore, was not a luxury but a necessity. Traditional camouflage could conceal equipment, but concealment alone was not enough. What commanders needed was something far more ambitious. They needed the enemy to believe in a false reality, to commit their forces to defending against operations that would never happen, and to waste time and energy responding to shadows. Military deception had always existed in some form, but modern warfare introduced new complications. Aerial reconnaissance allowed detailed photography of troop positions. Radio interception enabled intelligence analysts to monitor communication patterns. Trained observers could detect inconsistencies in equipment placement or movement. An illusion in 1944 had to survive inspection from a sky, from intercepted signals, and from ground observers using field glasses. It had to be consistent, coordinated, and continuous. The United States Army understood that achieving this level of deception would require more than standard military training. It would require creativity, technical precision, and a deep understanding of how perception shapes belief. So they assembled a unit unlike any other. The men selected for this experimental mission did not resemble conventional soldiers in background or profession. Many were recruited from art schools in New York and Philadelphia, while others came from careers in advertising, architecture, theater production, fashion design, and sound engineering. They were painters, sculptors, set designers, and illustrators who suddenly found themselves in uniform, trained not only in military discipline, but in the art of constructing convincing illusions. Among their ranks were individuals who would later become notable figures in American culture, including fashion designer Bill Blass and painter Ellsworth Kelly. At the time, however, they were simply young servicemen in their early 20s, learning how to merge artistic skill with battlefield necessity. Training took place under strict secrecy. The mission was classified from the beginning, and even many within the broader military structure did not fully understand the purpose of this unusual formation. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops ultimately consisted of roughly 1,100 men, yet through careful staging and coordinated deception, they could impersonate divisions numbering 15,000 or even 30,000 soldiers. Their objective was not to engage directly in sustained combat, but to shape enemy expectations so effectively that real American units could maneuver with reduced resistance. In essence, they were tasked with manufacturing an alternate version of the battlefield and persuading the enemy to accept it as genuine. One of the most remarkable tools used by the Ghost Army was deceptively simple: inflatable equipment constructed from rubber and fabric. Sherman tanks, artillery pieces, and transport trucks were designed to be lightweight and portable when deflated, allowing them to be carried in compact bundles. Once inflated, however, they took on a convincing three-dimensional form that from a distance appeared authentic, especially when positioned carefully in realistic formations. From the vantage point of an aircraft flying thousands of feet above, these inflatable tanks cast shadows that resembled those of real armored vehicles. When arranged along tree lines, near road junctions, or within open fields in patterns consistent with genuine deployments, they could withstand photographic scrutiny long enough to influence enemy planning. Visual deception, however, was only one element of the strategy. The Ghost Army also relied heavily on sound. Specialized units recorded and mixed authentic battlefield noises, including tank engines starting, trucks shifting gears, soldiers moving equipment, and construction teams assembling bridges. These recordings were played through powerful speakers mounted on vehicles, capable of projecting realistic mechanical sounds over considerable distances. At night, when visibility was limited and auditory cues carried greater weight, German listening posts would detect what seemed to be a large armored force preparing for movement. The combination of visual staging and acoustic simulation created a multi-layered illusion that engaged multiple senses and reinforced the same narrative. Meanwhile, real American forces could reposition elsewhere, shielded by the distraction. Perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the Ghost Army's operations involved radio deception. German intelligence devoted significant resources to intercepting and analyzing Allied radio communications, identifying patterns, call signs, and even the distinctive transmission styles of individual operators. To succeed, the 603rd Signal Company within the Ghost Army had to do more than broadcast random messages. They studied the habits of specific American divisions, learning how messages were structured, how frequently they were transmitted, and what terminology was typically used. Operators practiced mimicking the subtle rhythm, or fist, of Morse code transmissions associated with particular individuals. They created fictional operational narratives complete with supply requests, engineering updates, and tactical coordination, all designed to mirror authentic communication. These transmissions were not careless fabrications. They were carefully constructed performances intended to withstand analytical scrutiny. German intelligence officers listening to intercepted signals heard what appeared to be a functioning, active division coordinating complex maneuvers. The illusion extended beyond sight and sound into the invisible realm of communication patterns, reinforcing the credibility of the staged deployments. In August 1944, the Ghost Army carried out one of its significant operations near the French port city of Brest. Real American forces were maneuvering in the region and convincing German commanders that a major armored assault was imminent from a specific direction would reduce pressure elsewhere. The Ghost Army deployed inflatable tanks in open terrain, positioned them according to realistic doctrine, and broadcast mechanical and logistical sounds consistent with an impending offensive. Simultaneously, radio operators simulated detailed coordination among fictional units. German forces responded by adjusting their defenses, diverting attention and resources toward the perceived threat. The real American maneuvers, occurring in a different sector, encountered less concentrated opposition as a result. Yet these missions were never without danger. The Ghost Army operated relatively close to the front lines and was lightly armed compared to the divisions it impersonated. If their position had been overrun or thoroughly inspected, the illusion would have collapsed instantly. Their safety depended on timing, mobility, and the continued belief of the enemy. One of the most consequential deceptions occurred in March 1945 during preparations for crossing the Rhine River. The Rhine represented a major defensive barrier, and German command anticipated crossing attempts at particular strategic points. Through Operation Fearsinn, The Ghost Army created the appearance that two American divisions were preparing to cross at a false location. Inflatable artillery lined the banks. Fake command posts appeared in nearby fields. Sonic units broadcast the sounds of construction crews assembling pontoon bridges, and radio operators simulated the coordination of large-scale movement. German forces adjusted accordingly, shifting defensive focus toward the staged crossing site. Meanwhile, the actual crossing occurred elsewhere under more favorable conditions. By the war's end, the Ghost Army had conducted more than 20 major deception operations. Military historians later suggested that their work may have saved thousands of lives by diverting enemy firepower and reducing resistance in critical moments. When World War II concluded, the men of the Ghost Army returned home without public acknowledgement of their unusual role. Their missions remained classified, and they were instructed not to discuss the details of their service. There were no headlines announcing their achievements, no immediate recognition ceremonies highlighting their creativity. Many resumed civilian careers in art, design, fashion, and advertising, carrying with them a story that few were permitted to share. Only decades later, as documents were declassified and historians began to reconstruct the full scope of Allied deception efforts, did the extent of their contribution become widely known. In 2022, the unit was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, offering formal recognition long after most of its members had completed their quiet return to civilian life. The story of the Ghost Army challenges traditional assumptions about strength and victory. It demonstrates that influence can sometimes achieve what force alone cannot, and that creativity, when applied with discipline and coordination, can alter the course of events on a grand scale. Rubber tanks redirected real divisions. Recorded engine sounds reshaped defensive strategies. Carefully crafted radio messages changed battlefield decisions. These soldiers did not rely on overwhelming firepower to fulfill their mission. Instead, they relied on understanding how perception works, how expectations guide decision-making, and how a convincing narrative can shape reality. Their legacy invites a broader reflection. In moments of crisis, solutions may emerge not only from greater power, but from greater imagination. Sometimes the most effective strategy is not to confront directly, but to redefine what the opponent believes to be true. And perhaps that is the enduring lesson of the Ghost Army, that even in the harshest circumstances, creativity remains one of the most formidable tools at our disposal.